Thank you, Gia. Before we dive in, a few notes. Please silence your cell phones, but keep them close. We'd love you to join the conversation on Twitter at AtlanticLIVE, and the hashtag for today is Atlantic Innovators. And I have no doubt that you'll have many good questions of your own, so we'll make time for you across the evening. And now, please join me in welcoming Don Bonnell, Vice Provost of Research at the University of Pennsylvania, and Katherine High, President and Head of Research and Development at SPARC Therapeutics. And here to lead the conversation is my colleague, Atlantic staff writer, Derek Thompson. So Derek, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us under the hum of the train and the falling rain. This is an intimate gathering, so we do want to make sure that we have time for questions. We're going to talk for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll leave about just over 5 minutes for your questions, so be thinking of them as we go. As I was doing some research for this panel, for this event, looking at the long legacy of Philadelphia and the medical sciences and life sciences, I realized that it stretches back rather a far way. The first hospital in the British North Americas was right here in Philadelphia. So this is a legacy that goes back not just decades, but goes back centuries. Dawn, I want to start with you. At a high level, what is so special about Philadelphia when it comes to the life sciences?
Well, Philadelphia is really a nexus right now at this time, I think, a nexus of where very rapid discovery is happening on several really key platform technologies. And at the same time, the ecosystem in Philadelphia has grown to support the translation of this. So we're in a nice place where we can have discoveries happening, we can translate them and move them into, in the case of healthcare, into patients. And that's been, I think, a dramatic trajectory in the last 7 or 8 years in the evolution of the ecosystem.
And what role has Penn played as an engine of innovation in this city?
So, well, I would say on several fronts. First of all, Penn is a pretty large research enterprise, about $1.5 billion a year, and so there's a lot of fodder and ideas that can come out of that. But Penn has also been active in trying to actively translate some of the discoveries into products and particularly for patients. And so the cell and gene therapy area is just growing, and it's a nice example because, as we were saying a little bit back in the green room, it's the area where there are platform technologies. It's a platform technology in effect, and so it has the opportunity to have impact across many different, even not considered areas of impact to date. And so that portends an exciting time of growth and potential treatments and therapies and maybe even cures across many different disease sectors.
Yeah, well, it's nice to hear that we have an academic leader and also here an entrepreneurial leader. Kathy, SPARC Therapeutics is a juggernaut. And I'd love you to begin by telling me a little bit about its own origin story. Where did it come from? Where did the idea come from? And how has it developed into the company that it is today?
Well, I'm going to give you an overview. I've been interested in gene therapy as a way of treating serious inherited diseases for a long time. And in the 1990s, I started working with a gene therapy company in Northern California because they had invested a lot of resources in improving manufacturing technology for the gene delivery vector that we used, AAV. However, in the wake of several high-profile adverse events in the field of gene therapy, some here, some in Europe, general support for gene therapy drastically contracted from the biotech sector, from the pharmaceutical sector, and even from some more traditional funders like disease foundations and the NIH. And at that point in our work in the early 2000s, we went to the senior leadership of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and asked if they would continue to support the work since we felt we were making good progress and there were no problems that could not really be tackled and solved. And they agreed to do that. And we kept doing our work for another decade or so, and then we were really beginning to see successful clinical trials, as were a number of other groups as well. And in about 2012, we actually began to get cold calls from investors. We began to get inbounds from pharmaceutical and large biotech companies. And it was at that point that we began to think about, these were all people who walked away from gene therapy. What if in the rest of the development that we still have to traverse to get a product approved, they hit a snag and decide not to keep going? And for that reason, we eventually decided that the best thing to do is actually take a substantial part of our unit and spin it out as an independent company. And our first investor, the Series A investor, was the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
Wow, right. So this is, in a way, was it translational research, or they were sort of a temporary home for you while you were developing the technology, and then when you wanted more control over it, you spun it out, and they gave you a helping hand?
Well, the last part of the development process, late-stage development, actually bringing manufacturing to commercial standards, and then all the work to actually bring the product to patients once it's approved were things that the hospital doesn't really do. So early phase research, early phase development, all of those things I think have a natural home in institutions like Penn and CHOP that are vitally interested in translational research. But as things progress forward, you really need resources that only live in companies.
So you've worked with, been affiliated with life science, biotech startups in Northern California before this technology was potentially ready, that weren't necessarily working out, and you've been a part of a company that has worked out in many ways and has made some drugs that with FDA approval and approval in Europe as well. When you're inside of those companies, like I love talking to entrepreneurs and asking them, how do you know what you're doing is working? And it's difficult here because your gestation period is not like the gestation period for like a smartphone app where you can tell after week 2 whether or not you have 1,000 or 0 users. So how, when you're inside the company, do you keep a rigorous set of benchmarks so that you know I am making progress or this is not working?
Well, I think that all of the gene therapy companies that began in the 1990s, if I remember correct, none of those companies made it through. And I think what that reflected was simply that the technology that really allows one to do drug development in this space had not solved enough problems to really get to the point where you could bring things to late phase development and approval. And there were regulatory science considerations as well. For a new class of therapeutics, a lot really has to be figured out. How do you determine that it's safe? How do you do lot release and all those kinds of things? And so I think the companies in the 1990s had the right idea, but the runway was too long. And so then when all of these companies began again in this decade, many more problems had been solved, and it was really possible to do drug development in space. So I don't think there's really a formula for a successful company or a not successful company. I think those companies from the 1990s were trying to do things too early.
Right. It's like trying to build a social network in 1971. It's like the internet technology just is not there. Dawn, tell me a little bit about the student body at Penn. The pipeline, early on among undergraduates and I suppose among graduate students as well. How strong is the interest in the life sciences right now compared to where it used to be? Is this a situation where it's like history or English, where everything is being gobbled up by interest in computer science? Or would you say that the life science interests are really strong and thriving?
Well, there certainly is a lot of attention around computer science with AI and robotics and all of those technologies being another kind of a platform technology. But the excitement around some of these cell and gene therapies are also motivating students to be interested in the science and the research associated with this. And to go back and reinforce the point that you made, the institutions that have been supporting this and the early funders, this really was 20 years ago when those first ideas were started. And it wasn't in the beginning, the first 10 years when you could have directly translated into a product. So for the students and postdocs and other trainees right now to be able to see these things actually translating, the multiple approvals already for some of these therapies, is pretty inspiring to them. And so I don't see people leaving. I don't see a lack of interest on the part of the students or postdocs, let's say, or other trainees for this area. I don't think we have to worry. There might be some fields that might have to worry.
Great. Well, and on the issue of translation, so if you make, again, the analogy to computer science, you look at a place like Stanford where, they take a lot of their students who will, say, be interested in, developing an app, developing some search function, and then a venture capitalist will find them and they'll work with the venture capitalist, and so some work that will happen from some Stanford PhD in computer science will be spun off and it will become Google. This work of translating, difficult graduate level research into successful companies is one that San Francisco is famous for sort of developing an ecosystem around. How does Penn think about the relationship between the research that's going on there inside of your institution and the role that it's playing with money and potential mentors in the greater Philadelphia area?
I think that is what I was referring to when I talked about the ecosystem having changed so much in the last 7 or 8 years. Now, and from the Penn perspective, we are very active in supporting our students as they have ideas to start companies, and we've developed the infrastructure to do that sort of internally with those students and those postdocs. But we are all very engaged with the ecosystem and the other opportunities, Ben Franklin Partnerships, the Science Center, the Dream It. There's a wide array of these now that make it feasible to make translations more directly. And so I think that's happening a lot. And we have on the order of 60 companies that we spin out every year, and those are the ones that we are supporting and guiding through this ecosystem. In the last, some of the ones that you would have heard of that have spun out in the last 5 years, let's say, have raised $600 million through various stages of their development. And so this system is working to be able to move these therapies forward.
Right. Kathy, I'm interested in the idea that sometimes there's a science or a technology that just isn't quite ready for the world to appreciate. And I wonder whether, as you become more interested in developing this current fleet of gene therapies that you're working on, whether when you were going around talking to potential universities and investors, whether you have found doubters who have said, this stuff did not work in the 1990s in the Northern California cluster, and it's not going to work now in Philadelphia. Have you experienced any doubters along those lines?
Well, yes, I think that there was a good deal of skepticism about gene therapy for a long time. But if you look historically, the same thing was true for monoclonal antibodies. When they first began to undergo clinical development, there were things that didn't work very well. So yes, it is certainly the case that there was a lot of skepticism about gene therapy. But one of the great things about Philadelphia was that there was a critical mass of investigators who were really working in the space. And I found that very helpful because the problems that you encountered in trying to do gene therapy into the liver for hemophilia may have findings that would be important for doing gene therapy in the retina, and problems around manufacturing were shared across the space. Innovations that we made in AAV manufacturing at Children's Hospital, we actually applied some of those same things to manufacture lentiviral vectors for CAR T-cell trials. So, there's a great advantage to being in the midst of a place where there's a lot of activity in the space, and that simply was not true for a number of large and prestigious academic medical centers outside of Philadelphia.
So
And
what was
could I just
Please,
make
go
a
right ahead,
connection
yeah.
between that and your comment on Silicon Valley and the ecosystem there? I think that Philadelphia is in a position right now with this critical mass in the area of cell and gene therapy, with the mechanisms now in the ecosystem we've developed, and with the venture capitalists knocking on our door. We don't have to go looking for them. They come knocking on our door. I think that Philadelphia is in the space to be the Silicon Valley, to be that ecosystem, a place where the ecosystem and around this space, around cell and gene therapy, happens here, and we are the center of it.
Yeah. How do you make that case to young workers as well? Do you feel like the pipeline is there in Philadelphia, that if you're a company that has happened on a really, really exciting new science and technology in cell or gene therapy, like there is a rich sort of network of people to hire from immediately?
Well, I would like to address that by saying that the University of Pennsylvania is one of the rare graduate schools that actually has a graduate program in gene therapy and vaccines as part of their molecular and cellular biology graduate group. And that's unusual. So I think there's a very good pipeline of people at Penn, at Drexel, and at other institutions who are really interested in this space. And I think the other asset in the city of Philadelphia, for early stage development and for early science, for actually designing the vectors, you need the people who trained in those graduate programs. But you also need people, physicians, and people who commercialize products. And the city of Philadelphia is ringed by large pharmaceutical companies. And there are lots of people in that space who, in this area who know that part of drug development.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And we've also seen in some of our startup activities that we're now seeing people moving from San Francisco and Boston to come here to do the company. So the vibe is changed.
What are the reasons that you've heard that they're doing that?
Because the technologies are so compelling, and this is the place to do cell and gene therapy.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, so one thing that we were talking about that I'm hearing on stage, we were talking about backstage, is that this region, not just Philadelphia, but also northern Delaware, this part of Pennsylvania, is really, really strong, particularly on the mid to later stages of development. The manufacturing. And, it kind of reminds me in a way of, I wrote a piece about what makes Minneapolis so special for Fortune 500 companies. So Minneapolis has the largest density of Fortune 500 companies per capita of any metro area in the U.S. And that was really interesting to me, and I wanted to know why. And an interesting reason that was given was that it had a high density of successful, smart middle managers who could essentially move from company to company and say, you're almost a Target, I can make you a Target. You're almost a General Mills, I can help make you a General Mills. They could catch these emerging, consumer product companies at the moment that they were sort of having hockey stick growth and manage their growth. And in a way, I'm kind of hearing that this area has a similar sort of tranche of talent, that as you're emerging as a biotech startup, that this region has the development and manufacturing talent and facilities in order to get you there. I wonder, A, how you feel about that analogy, and B, whether that suggests there might also be something to work on for the actual startup phase, for the phase that comes before that hockey stick moment.
So I would point to a couple of additional advantages in comparison to Minneapolis that Philadelphia has, and that would be it is close
to the weather.
Yeah, well, there's that. But it is close to New York, and it's close to Washington, and it's well connected and has mass transit, and the cost of living here is lower than San Francisco and Boston, right? So those are some of the sort of lifestyle advantages that Philadelphia has as well.
Well, I mean, our sponsor for this evening's event, Bristol-Myers Squibb, and many other companies in the area have supplied, or we have been able to recruit people with a great deal of experience in drug development from Merck, and Bristol-Myers Squibb, and GSK, and Pfizer, and so forth, and of course that's an advantage.
Right.
They don't have to move.
Yeah.
We have some time for questions if there are hands in the audience. I see one there.
Oh, cool. Good afternoon. My name is Luke. First wanted to say thank you for kind of all of the energy in the room. As a Penn public health alum, definitely resonates with me. And one thing that I'm curious about is Philadelphia kind of has this tale of two cities narrative where there's all of this exciting work going on, particularly in life sciences and the idea of the Silicon Valley, and then the other side being the poorest large city in the country. And I'm wondering, for both of you on the stage, where and how with your respective institutions you may think about the ramifications of poverty and scarcity from a genetic and cellular level at the research and at the innovation perspective, and where your institutions may be doing work to not only be on these progressive technological innovations, but also on the larger structural innovations, both in the research of those impacts, as well as how there may be opportunity to affect those.
Me to start? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, you asked it on many different levels. What I can do is I can point to the fact that we have a tremendous amount of work going on in the research of health disparities in the Philadelphia area and globally as well. So we do have that as one of the fundamental issues that we are focused on. In addition, as an institution, we engage with the city on many fronts to try to mitigate the kind of issues that you're speaking about, and that's shown, I think, sort of explicit physical manifestation in West Philly, but we're concerned also about the school districts and so forth. So we are engaging as an institution on those issues.
And what I would say is that although I do see a future for cell and gene therapy to address complex acquired disorders, I don't see a direct way for cell and gene therapy to address some of the issues that you're talking about. But I am very pleased that the new cell and gene therapy companies that have started up in Philadelphia have created something like 3,000 jobs. Not all of those jobs are for MDs and PhDs. And I think a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that I really hope that the sector continues to expand here.
Thank you. Good question.
Hi, I just want to fall, I'm sorry. Hi, I'm Saul Bihar with the University City Science Center. Thanks so much, Dawn, for the shout out. I wanted to respond also to the question that you asked, particularly in terms of workforce. So just for everyone's benefit, the Science Center and the Chamber, the CEO Council for Growth, which is affiliated with the Chamber of Commerce, and University City District, which is a leading special services district in Philadelphia, we're partnering on an employer-focused workforce needs assessment to figure out exactly what jobs are available now in the cell and gene therapy space and which jobs are going to be available in the next 3 to 5 years or so in the cell and gene therapy and connected health space. And we've actually formed an advisory committee. We have a couple of folks from SPARC on the committee. We have some folks from other companies in the region like Amicus and Cabaletta and several other gene therapy companies. And it's our belief that there will be jobs in the future at all levels, not just at the MD and PhD level, but also at the college degree level and even below, right? And so this also aligns with our interest in figuring out what opportunities are going to exist for residents, at all levels in the city of Philadelphia, particularly in West Philadelphia and the surrounding neighborhoods, where you have companies like SPARC and Penn and Drexel. And it's interesting because the preliminary findings that we've brought together, there's really kind of a split. Some folks think there are going to be plenty of jobs available for folks at all levels, and some folks think that maybe not necessarily, in the next 3 to 5 years. We need to do more research around that, but we're still very optimistic. So.
Thank you. Any comment?
Well, and I might point to the fact in terms of supporting the workforce development in the city and not just with the PhDs and the scientists, that all of the academic institutions here, Penn, Drexel, Temple, have, and Jefferson, have very active outreach programs throughout their institutions on very many different topics, but aimed at K through 12, at high school, at coding for people who want to transition. And so you would see all of the academic institutions in the city contributing to that.
I don't think I have anything to add. I'm delighted to hear that somebody is looking at that and trying to shape education even before they emerge into the workforce, but there are certainly areas where we have shortages.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Right here.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Fabiola. I'm a senior editor at Philadelphia Magazine. I have a question for Kathy. We talked December 2017, right after Luxturna was approved, and a huge discussion was the cost of the drug. And so I want to hear from you, what are your thoughts now that we're like months later? Is the focus still on the cost of the drug, and just where are we in terms of the price tag for gene therapy?
It was on the price tag for gene therapy.
The price tag for gene therapy. So I'm glad you brought up that question, and we have spent a fair amount of time talking about reimbursement, access, and so forth for gene therapy. I think the challenge for all cell and gene therapies, not just SPARC Therapeutics, is that all of that work is emerging into a payment system that was designed for chronic administration. You take the medicine for a long period of time, and the payment system is set up for that. The goal of cell and gene therapy, arising from the Human Genome Project, is that you could have a one-time therapy for a serious medical condition. But the system isn't set up for that type of therapeutic. And so at SPARC, we've spent a fair amount of time innovating around payment models, looking for strategies that let the sponsor share risk with the insurer, so that if the patient does not have a therapeutic effect, there's a possibility for a rebate. If the patient doesn't have a durable effect, there's a possibility for a rebate. And of course, we proposed mechanisms to CMS, the Medicaid and Medicare payment system, to allow payment over time rather than as a one-time payment, and they're still looking at those.
Great. That's all we have time for in this panel. Please join me in thanking my panelists here.